Hi, everybody. Welcome to this last video of our business English course. This lesson is on punctuation. It's a slightly longer lesson, again, just because there's so much punctuation that we need to use, and we need to be very careful about how we use it. If you remember in the very first module when we talked about run-on sentences where people just string this mass amount of words together and there's no punctuation to break it up, how confusing and how difficult it is to comprehend what they're trying to say. And so it is very important that we learn to use punctuation properly. And for this course, I'm making the assumption that you understand end of sentence punctuation, that we don't need to go over periods, question marks, exclamation points. So we're going to jump in with some of the other punctuation here for this video. We're going to start with commas, and it has the sort of the most usage probably of our punctuation marks. So there are a lot of examples here, a lot of different ways we use them. Again, most of the time your software will alert you if you need a comma and have forgotten it, okay? So we're going to begin with commas, and the first part of commas that we're going to look at is commas in what we call a series. Commas are required to separate three or more equally ranked elements in a series. And this applies in all different types of series. And so we have some different sentences here to look at. This first one, I'm just going to highlight the sentences as I go to help you keep up with where we are. Bring your notebook, comma, pen, comma, and textbook to class every day. The commas there, the series there is just individual words. We use commas to separate them. You can also use commas, or you do also use commas, to separate phrases in a series, as we see in this sentence here. You can remove the cover, comma, adjust the drive belt, comma, and replace the cover with just one tool. See how that works there. And also clauses, and remember the difference between a phrase and a clause is that the clauses stand alone. We cannot decide what information we will store, how we will retrieve it, or how it will be used. And in this sentence, you see there's a comma. There's a comma after store. There's a comma after it. There's a comma after the clauses so that you know that you've got a series of different things, three or more, all in a row, and the commas are used to separate them. Okay. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about coordinate situations. You use a comma in a compound sentence before a coordinating conjunction. Remember, we talked about those type of sentences in earlier modules. Those coordinating conjunctions, and, but, or, nor, they join two independent clauses, remember? For example, we see here, you must set the dial, and we see we have our comma right there. And this is where your conjunction is. Hold on. I did that strange thing I do where I'm changing the text instead of the highlight. There we go. The ready light must be available. So you see here you have two independent clauses joined by a conjunction. When you see that situation, you need a comma before your conjunction, okay? Now we have these words that we learned are called conjunctive adverbs. However, therefore, consequently, moreover, these type of words, this right here. However, you always need a comma after one of those words. However, comma, you need to be careful, okay? And then also in coordinate situations, we use commas between coordinate adjectives, but there's a couple of stipulations there. You see right here, you have that as an efficient, inexpensive unit, and you see your comma is placed right here after efficient and inexpensive, and that is correct. You use a comma between coordinate adjectives, but you need to make sure that they are, first of all, reversible. Is it reversible? Could you say that is an inexpensive, efficient unit? You could. So yes, it meets that criteria. Also, you have to make sure that you could put the word and between them and the sentence still makes sense. That is an efficient, comma, and expensive unit. If you could put and in there, as you could, or you could reverse them, then you need the comma. And so in this sentence, we need the comma. Okay. Now we're going to move on to some introductory elements when we need commas. We need commas for nouns of direct address is what this is called. It's when you call someone's name in a sentence. Karen, The door is still open. You put a comma after Karen. Anytime you're speaking directly to someone in a sentence, you put a comma after their name. Mild interjections. We learned about interjections. In this sentence, it's well. Well, comma, I didn't like the conference. Anytime you have an interjection like that in a sentence, the comma comes immediately after it. Okay? Now, you also use commas in introductory prepositional, phrases. In a rush of anger. And a rush of anger is a prepositional phrase. You put a comma after it because it is the beginning of the sentence. If you begin a sentence with a prepositional phrase like that, you put a comma after it. In a rush of anger, he destroyed the equipment. Okay? Participle phrases. Referring to the chart, you will note the clear results. You put a comma here. And I realize when we're getting into some of this, not a lot of people write this type of way anymore. And sometimes in business writing, it's not even the most accepted way or perhaps the best way to write, but you need to still know the rules. If you're going to begin a sentence with a participle phrase, referring to the chart, comma, you will note the clear results. Infinitive phrases. To install the storm door, comma, remove the packing material. Okay, it might be better in business writing to say, remove the packing material to install the storm door, or probably prior to installation. There you go. It's helping me. These are the types of things you might really probably want to change your writing to for specifically business writing. But we are also learning all sorts of grammatical rules that will apply across all of your writing, okay? Now, subordinate clauses. After he typed the memo, comma, this one, remember, is dependent because after. He typed the memo is a complete thought. After he typed the memo leaves us hanging, right? So we put a comma there between our dependent clause and our independent clause, which is Carlos sent it to the boss, okay? And then also in transitions, parenthetical expressions. First of all, comma, I want to explain the controls. Okay? First of all, gets a comma after it. My daughter will tell you if I say first of all, you probably don't want to hear what's coming next because that is a phrase I tend to use when something has irritated me. But it doesn't have to mean that, right? It could mean before we get started with anything else, I want to explain the controls. Okay, and then also we need commas to enclose interrupting elements that break the flow of the sentence. These includes noun of direct address, like in this sentence. In some cases, comma, Mr. Mendez, comma. If it is one of these, if it is an interrupting element, you put a comma before it and after it. This rule helps. Because you could take Mr. Mendez out of this sentence. It interrupts the sentence. You could just say, in some cases, this rule helps. But when you put Mr. Mendez in there, it is an interrupting element. Okay, so you put commas on both sides. Okay, there are also commas that have highly specific rules in standard places across business formatting. I did not list all of those because I didn't want this to just be too much to look at. You know, after geographic locations, you place a comma before and after parts of cities and states. We live in Carthage, comma, Texas, right? You understand that. You use commas between and after the parts of a year. He won the race May 17th, comma, 2018, comma, don't forget, and do that also with states. In our Carthage, Texas sentence, if we had words after Texas, we need a comma after that as well. You use commas to set off the direct words of a speaker. Let me type that out for you. Like you would say, Leah said, comma, don't forget your comma. Okay? Don't forget, those commas go there as well. In letter correspondence, if it's after sincerely or thank you, you put a comma before your closing signature. There are certain titles where you use commas. There are things like that that you just sort of have to know, sort of have to learn, just learn to be familiar with, okay? There are a lot of uses for commas. A lot of people miss commas. A lot of people use commas where they don't go. We talked about comma splices in our sentence structure module. So just be sure that you follow along with what your software is warning you, and that when in doubt, you look it up. Okay. Now let's look a little bit at the semicolon. Okay. And a semicolon is this one. It is the winky face emoji with the parentheses after it. That is the semicolon. They are primarily used to indicate the omission of a coordinating conjunction, okay, between two closely related independent clauses. Instead of writing the boys ordered pizza and the girls ordered hamburgers, you can just say the boys ordered pizza, semicolon, the girls ordered hamburgers. And that is correct. This is a sentence that could be made into two sentences, or you could put a comma and put and, but it is also correct to just use the semicolon between the two, okay? If it is, you may also place a semicolon before a second independent clause starting with a conjunctive adverb. Keep in mind that the transition word isn't always the very first word in the second clause, okay? You may begin registration, semicolon. You must see Mrs. Smith, however, okay? Again, you could take however out of here, and you would have two independent clauses, and it would be this exact same thing. But the however, even though this word is at the end, this is still a dependent clause, because if I say you must see Miss Smith, however, you would feel like you had missed part of the thought, correct? So also in joining that dependent clause and that independent clause, you can put a semicolon. Okay, another place that you use semicolons that we do not always realize is if we go back to that list of 3 or more where we were using commas before, but in our list, there's already commas. Like if you're saying Dallas, Texas, San Francisco, California, and Jacksonville, Florida, you might get confused because it's going to look like there are 6 things in your list if you do this. I have lived in Dallas, Texas, San Francisco, California. That's not what you're trying to say. You're trying to say Dallas, Texas, San Francisco, California, and Jacksonville, Florida. So in those cases, you use the semicolons in place of the comma. If your list contains words that need commas between them, but it's one unit, Dallas, Texas is one word with a comma between it. San Francisco, California is one unit with a comma between it. Jacksonville, Florida is one unit with a comma between it. Then to separate that series, you use semicolons, okay? Now we're going to go to colon, and colon is this. Oh, nope. You have to push shift to type a colon. It's the 2 dots, one on top of each other. A colon is used with expressions like the following, as follows, and these to introduce a formal list. However, exercise caution. If the sentence does not immediately and directly lead into the list, use a period instead of a colon, okay? But here we see some sentences where it's proper to use a colon. Glenn cited 2 good reasons. Colon, that means we're just about to get right into the list, and that you see that we do. Namely, the cost and the time investment. Those are the 2 good reasons that he listed, okay? So that's when you use a colon in that situation. Okay, you can also use them to emphasize an important rule or principle. Remember, study for your final exam. You can put a colon there to show that this is emphasizing an important rule. And also in business letters, after your greeting, you use a colon, which is a bit different. In most of your personal writing, you use a comma. If you said, hey, Leah, you might say exclamation point, or you would probably say comma. But if you're writing to me professionally, you would say, Dear Mrs. Morales, colon. That is just a more professional way of writing it, okay? So those are the ways that we use colons. Now let's talk a little bit about the dash. The dash is an excellent tool for adding some sort of stylistic variety and emphasis to your writing. It can be used, in place of semicolons and colons. It tends to carry a more forceful tone, okay? The text is next week, dash, you must make a good grade, right? You see how that feels a little bit more forceful. Dashes are explicitly utilized for 3 other major business writing structures. Semicolons, colons, dashes are all explained in chapters 11 and 12. You see that you put a dash right there. It is used deliberately to repeat a point for clarity. Okay, it helps. It is used to separate an afterthought in a sentence. Connect sort of, if you have a sort of unexpected or clarifying afterthought to the end of a complete sentence. No other cola is as refreshing. Coke is the best. You put a dash there. It is used to help emphasize breaks and explanatory phrases. If you put dashes around interrupting phrases, sometimes it helps with lists and mid-sentences. Like several people, dash, Tom, Mark, Sally, and Harry, dash, have volunteered for help. This is important in this type of sentence. If you were going to use a dash in this way to sort of set off the thing that comes in the middle that sort of interrupts, because you could just say several people have volunteered to help, but you've decided to insert their names in there. And so you're putting the dash, but you have to put it at the beginning and at the end. So if you're going to use the dashes, don't forget to use them on both sides. Okay, and this is sort of done the same way. It's not a list, but it is something that is interrupting the sentence, because you could just say Sally called yesterday, but you had a question in the middle. And so you said Sally, or was it Tom, called yesterday. Now I'm going to tell you this type of sentence really has no place in your business writing. Don't use it for that. But these dashes can really help you if you get into more of an regular English class where your teacher might be wanting to see some sort of creative writing skills. These types of things just really make you look like you have a great understanding on grammar and punctuation and how it all works together. Okay. Now, finally, we're going to look at quotation marks. We use them to enclose direct quotations. Okay. Like this one we see here. Quotation mark, open the quotation marks. You can never be overdressed or overeducated. Comma, don't forget that comma goes after it. Close quotation, said Oscar Wilde. That is something Oscar Wilde said directly. If you wrote a sentence that was like, I don't really want this italicized. Oscar Wilde said something about being never being overdressed or overeducated. You don't use quotes for that, because that's not exactly what he said. When you are quoting exactly what someone said or exactly what you read written in another document that you're pulling directly into your writing, then you put it in quotation marks, okay? You can also use quotation marks to set off definitions of words, okay? Like you see here. The Latin phrase ex post facto means quotation after the fact. Close the quotation. Okay, that is another time that you use quotations. There are some punctuations within quotation marks that you need to remember. Okay, periods and commas. If the sentence is ending like it is here, the period goes inside the quotation mark. Okay. If it's not ending, you need a comma inside the quotation mark. But pretty much you can tell yourself, I need some sort of punctuation on the inside of every closing quotation mark I ever use, okay? Colons and semicolons are placed outside the closing quotation marks without exception. Question marks and exclamation points, they go inside as well. So I guess the only exception to always having something inside the quotation mark would be if what you needed to use was a colon and a semicolon, but that is going to be a much more rare occurrence. Okay, guys, that's all for our punctuation lesson. And because this is the last video of the course, I just want to tell you how much I have enjoyed working with you. I appreciate all that you've put into it. I just want to wish you the best of luck in everything that you do from here.